Welcome to the American Garage. Welcome back to the American Garage. Let's take a minute and talk about power steering pumps. Now, power steering pumps are typically a remove and replace item. People don't typically want to get inside of these things, but every once in a while you have something go wrong that would warrant a further investigation instead of just chucking the whole thing. And I ran into an event like that. What happened was we had our power steering pump in the car, and the hose that feeds it disintegrated and went inside the pump. Parts of it went inside the pump. So instead of just throwing it away and getting another one, I decided what's the harm in going in there and seeing if we could fix what's wrong. So what I did is I opened up the power steering pump and I found all little pieces of the old hose jammed in all the passageways inside. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to, now that we've got this apart, we're going to reassemble it and see if it works in the car. This is out of an Audi A6, and this pump has some unique qualities that others don't. But let me show you how a power steering pump works. All right, let's take our old one first. Now, you've got the power steering pump. There's a big flywheel on the front. This thing turns and it drives a pump on the inside. Now, you see this black cap here. This is where the low pressure hose comes into the power steering pump. The pump pressurizes the power steering fluid, and the high pressure comes out over here and goes down to the rack and pinion if you have a rack and pinion steering. And this is what makes it easy for you to turn your steering wheel. Now, there are two chambers, and you can see them on the outside. See this narrower area? This narrower area is the high pressure chamber, and you can see that where the high pressure comes out, it's attached to the high pressure chamber. This is the low pressure chamber, and this is the feed in from the reservoir coming in and filling up the low pressure chamber, just to fill it up with fluid. Now, what you see on the bottom here, there's this piece that separates the high pressure from the low pressure side of the pump. Now, this piece has certain holes in it that once the pump turns, it's going to force the fluid down into the high pressure side. Here is the heart of the pump right here. Now, you will find this outer ring, and it has an oval shape to it. See that oval shape? Now, the pump drive impeller is made of metal, and there are all these little veins on the inside of it. Now, these veins come out. I'll see if I can pull one out for you real quick. And they look like this on this particular car. On my car, they have a little notch right in the middle of the inside. But what happens is these little veins, when the pump spins, they're flung out. But this guy right here, they're inside here, and so they will only come out on the oblong sides of the oval. Let's see if I can get one out. There we go. Centrifugal force will push them out, and they will scoop up some power steering fluid and force it through the hole into the high pressure side. What you have inside here is you have the regulator, the pressure regulator. So this little guy senses the pressure, and when it's got too much pressure, it closes so that no more pressure goes into the system. This one opens up past this hole, and fluid can flow freely and pressurize the system. And when it has enough pressure, this little piston then closes, and it creates neutral pressure in the system, because you don't need any pressure at that point. So when we were in here, and once I opened it up, I discovered all of this mess was in there. Let me show you where most of it was. Most of it was in here in the inlet from the low pressure side. Now, one of the things that I noticed was this was loose over here, and so I had taken it off. I had to be a lot of pressure on it, but it wasn't. And the O-ring was blown. You can see how the fluid was just getting by there. When I had put this, when I started the car after this had happened, noticed power steering noise, and I thought maybe we just had some air bubbles in there that work it out and the noise would go away, and it got worse. So I stopped the car, I opened it up, and power steering fluid was everywhere. And what had happened was the O-ring behind here was blown, and that's this one right here. And when it blew, since this is the high pressure side, it was just spraying out everywhere. There was a little piece of crud that was jammed in here, and now it wouldn't close. So the system was pressurizing. Now that makes sense to the failure, because what was happening was this guy was left open because it had this little stopper keeping it open, and now the system was pressurizing and it blew out right here at the connector. All right, so we figured that out. We got it all cleaned out, and when I took this open, this piece wouldn't come out because that piece was stuck in there. So what I ended up doing was pushing it in a little bit, and I could see through the hole down here, I could see the little piece of crud. And so I was able to get that out, and once I did, this little piece came out freely. I'm going to put it back together and see if it works as it did before, which I expect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the high pressure valve from the housing. And I'm going to take the pressure relief regulator valve out. And let's go ahead, before we start taking this all apart, let's keep things clean and separate from this other one over here. So we'll lay out the parts over here. Now we got our pressure relief valve right there. Okay, now I want to show you something else. Now this pump had failed. This was like 150,000 miles when this one failed, so it had a lot of life on it. But how we can tell that it failed is, well, it wouldn't pump anymore. But notice that there's some play right here in the front, where the front pulley goes. And it rattles, it has all kinds of noises going on inside there. So the seals here and the connection here had failed, okay? And that's the obvious indication that you have a failed pump. Now, when we look at our current one, now this one, it's real snug in there, it turns real smooth. There's no back and forth play at all in it. So we know that this is still good. So my belief is that once we get this thing put back together, it's going to be perfect again. Okay. Now, so we're going to continue taking this apart because we want to see what else is going on inside here and see if there's anything we can do about rebuilding this one as well. And we'll have it as a spare. Okay, so now I'm going to take my 10 millimeter wrench. Here it is. 10 millimeter wrench. And we'll take this off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all but 2 of them all the way out. Now with these last 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen them about 1/4 of an inch. Now, with them sticking out, I'll be able to break the seal holding the back on there. So I'm going to turn it upside down. I'm going to use my rubber mallet. Got my rubber mallet right here. And I'm going to just tap it in a few places to get it loose. And we got it loose. Alright. Now, oh, I forgot my spring that goes with my pressure regulator. Okay. Now I'm going to hold it together. I'm going to finish taking these last two bolts out of here. Now on the first one that I took apart, I didn't realize that in the middle here there's all those little roller pins that are loose. Okay? So this time I am aware of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it with the back plate facing down. And now I am going to remove the pump from the back plate. As I do, we can see that the pump impeller stayed right there. And this is the body right here, just like the other one. Okay. So I'm going to set this piece aside. And now we have our two long pins that are in the middle of the oblong piece. So I'm going to remove those together. All right. Now I have my impeller just sitting there. And down below the impeller is my my little roller bearings. Now I can see some of the vanes sticking out on my impeller. So it's okay to push those back in there. And notice how it's all soaked with power steering fluid. One thing, when you're working in a power steering pump like this, when you want to clean it up, don't use parts cleaner. Go ahead and just use some clean power steering fluid to clean all these pieces up. And we'll set that aside. Looks like one of them fell out. That's okay, because we know how it went in there. So we'll just put it right back in. Now, this is what I want to show you right here. Now, inside here, we have all of those little roller bearings. And they're undisturbed at this point. Now, had we taken it off from the top, then all of those little guys in there would just fall. Okay? So knowing that, we took it off upside down so that they stay in place. What we're going to do now is we're going to put it back together. So I've got a new O-ring in the bottom, and I'm making sure that all the little pins inside are straight up and down. Then we'll use a little bit of the right kind of power steering fluid. It's made for this particular model. And I will make sure that we wipe everything and make sure it's all clean as we go back together. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the impeller on the top of here. I'm just going to eyeball, try to line it up the center as best as I can. Alright, now I'll take a little bit more of the power steering fluid and let's wipe the oblong piece that goes around the impeller. See, I want it all clean. Now it's got these two rings, and those face the pump itself. So we'll have to remember that we get those exactly right. Now there's also some holes. There's 4 little holes. The big holes are the ones that the pins go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my pins here, and I am going to line them up with the pinholes on the bottom. I'm going to push all little pieces of the impeller in while I'm doing this. Okay, I got one lined up. There. Got both of those lined up. I have 2 holes here that have to line up with the pins here. The other thing is they've helped me out because there's 2 notches here and there's a long groove on this side matching up with this, this, and this. So I can match it up real easily. I'll use my flashlight to look down in there and make sure everything just looks pretty much straight. All the little pins have stayed in their place. So now, very carefully, I'm going to just lower it onto the pump impeller. And I'm just going to very carefully make sure it lines up exactly. All right. I'll just squeeze it together real quick. All right. Now I'm going to flip it over. Okay. Now, everything is seated, which tells me the little pins that guide, those 2 long pins, are in their holes on this side, and everything is connected and everything is in its place. So now I'll put the bolts back in. The reason that we go to the opposite side in a star pattern is because then the plate seats evenly. If we tighten it down, it might prop up a little bit, or it might have odd pressure and it might not sit as flat. So that's why we do that. That's done in many places in mechanics. Now we've got to put our spring back in. It just drops in there. And I'm going to pour a little bit of power steering fluid in there. And that will help keep things lubricated as we're assembling our pump. Okay, now just push it down a little bit. That's working very nicely. Okay, now we've got a new O-ring on our pressure relief valve bolt, and we'll slide that on there. So, as you can see, now that we've got our pump all back together, it's ready to go in the car. So I'm going to put it in the car and try it out, and hopefully everything will go just fine. We'll test it, we'll look for leaks for a couple of days. If everything goes A-okay, then we saved ourselves some money. Now you can see how we took it apart, and you can see that this is not that mysterious of a mechanism, and as long as you're careful, you may be able to save your power steering pump or rebuild it yourself and save yourself a couple of dollars. Plus, you know how it works. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The American Garage. I'm going to put it in the car and see how it runs. Thanks for joining us, and join us next time right here on The American Garage.